The ultimate bone of contention was a recurring villain called the Green Goblin, whose identity had always been hidden. When it became time for the long-awaited unmasking, Lee recalls that Ditko said, "It should be somebody they've never seen before, just some person." Lee, on the other hand, felt that a startling revelation had been promised. "Every reader in America is going to think we're crazy. They'll be angry. It's got to be somebody," Lee said. Ditko left without drawing the story. "I had a big argument with Steve Ditko, who was drawing the strip at the time. When we had to reveal the identity of the Green Goblin, I wanted him to turn out to be the father of Harry Osborn, and Steve didn't like that idea. He said, 'No, I don't think he should be anybody we've seen before.'" Hello and welcome. One of the most enduring questions about Steve Ditko is the reason why he quit Amazing Spider-Man. Many believe a disagreement over the identity of the Green Goblin was the reason he left. As evidence to support this theory, in the issue following Ditko's departure, Norman Osborn is revealed to be the masked villain, a development that Ditko allegedly resisted. The timing of the two events, Ditko leaving and the Green Goblin being unmasked, seemed less than coincidental. It's very easy to conclude one led to the other. Furthermore, Stan Lee has, on numerous occasions, stated that he and Ditko had a falling out over the character's identity. Lee stopped short of saying that's the reason for Ditko's departure, but the heavy, unmistakable implication is that shortly after this argument, Ditko quit. Finally, Ditko remained radio silent. His perspective on events was utterly unknown. So Lee's account became the official narrative, and over the decades, others filled in the gaps with speculation concerning Ditko's reasons. As this video will demonstrate, Ditko didn't leave Marvel as a result of a disagreement with Lee over the Green Goblin's identity. Furthermore, the issue of Green Goblin's identity was never intended to be someone random. These claims will be supported by some circumstantial evidence, and the one thing usually overlooked, Ditko's own words. First, we have to look at the working relationship between Lee and Ditko. For roughly the first 16 issues, they would have in-person plotting sessions. They'd discuss the villain, the story of the issue, and various other details. From there, Ditko would go to his studio, draw the entire issue, and type out notes for Lee to follow when he wrote the dialogue. Ditko would take these pages into Lee, where they would discuss any artwork changes, and design a cover. Ditko would note the changes in the margins of each page. The issue was then scripted by Lee and sent off to be lettered, while Ditko drew the cover. When the lettered pages were ready, Ditko would pick them up, make any necessary artwork changes, and ink them. He'd turn those pages in, and the whole process started again. During this time, Lee and Ditko would disagree over certain elements. One such disagreement was over the new character, the Green Goblin. According to Ditko, quote, "Stan's synopsis for the Green Goblin had a movie crew, on location, finding an Egyptian-like sarcophagus. Inside was an ancient mythological demon, the Green Goblin. He naturally comes to life. I rejected Stan's idea." Unquote. The Green Goblin debuted in issue 14 with no suggestion of an origin. There was a movie production though, so Lee's idea wasn't entirely discarded. Presuming Ditko's account is accurate, this might be where the rift begins. Because if true, Lee couldn't have been too pleased that Ditko rejected his plot and did his own thing. Regardless, this conflict between the two would continue to grow. A few months later, in issue 17, Lee announced, quote, "And as for old Spidey, next issue is gonna be real different. The whole plot was dreamed up by Sonny Steve, and it was just nutty enough for Stan to okay it. You'll see Spidey acting differently than ever before. Nuff said." Unquote. What was so different about that issue, one might ask? In the prior issue, Aunt May wound up in the hospital while Peter was fighting the Green Goblin. Feeling guilty, Peter decides to give up being Spider-Man and care for his aunt. In the next issue, entirely done by Ditko, Spider-Man avoids any conflict, even running away from Sandman at one point. In the end, Aunt May turns out to be fine, and J. Jonah Jameson's editorials, calling Spider-Man a phony, inspire Peter to become Spider-Man again. So yes, a unique classic take on the struggles Peter Parker faces as Spider-Man. It was certainly different than the standard Marvel action story. As noted by John Morrow in the wonderful compilation Stuff Said, Lee developed a habit of using the letter page, his monthly soapbox, and the next issue solicitations to gently take shots at his collaborators. The line, "You'll see Spidey acting differently than ever before," lacks any context and could be seen as a light, playful jab, or promotional hyperbole. Within context, knowing he and Ditko argued over the plot, it could be interpreted as Lee venting his frustration and gently suggesting to the readers that if the next issue sucks, it's because of Ditko. Admittedly, that may be reading too much into a simple statement. However, there was at least one occasion where Lee was rather petty. He stated, quote, "I don't plot Spider-Man anymore. Steve Ditko, the artist, has been doing the series. I guess I'll leave him alone until sales start to slip. Since Spidey got so popular, Ditko thinks he's the genius of the world. We were arguing so much over plot lines, I told him to start making up his own stories. He won't let anybody else ink his drawings either. He just drops off the finished pages with notes at the margins, and I fill in the dialogue." Unquote. That is a rather antagonistic portrayal of Ditko, and it clearly supports the fact that Lee kept his distance from him, and his involvement with Spider-Man was limited to writing the dialogue. In Ditko's defense, some details, such as the webbing on Spider-Man's outfit, wouldn't be added until the inking stage. Furthermore, he sometimes needed to make artwork changes. Since he was a capable inker, it only made sense that he'd make those changes, and then ink the pages to avoid delaying an issue. However, Lee implies Ditko is a finicky control freak who wouldn't allow his work to be inked by anyone else. It conveniently overlooks the practical, expedient side of Ditko doing the work. The defense rests, Your Honor. Now, the point isn't to disparage Lee's character, but to note the creators were not getting along during the second year of Spider-Man's run, and by the third year, they weren't speaking to one another. Naturally, their working relationship also changed. Somewhere around issue 20, Lee and Ditko stopped having story discussions. Instead, Ditko drew the entire issue, plotting it entirely on his own, and making typed notes. He'd hand those pages to Lee, who would script the dialogue. At some point, the production manager, Saul Brodsky, would intervene on Lee's behalf and take Ditko's penciled pages. Ditko would receive them back from Brodsky after they were lettered and needed to be inked. From accounts by Lee, Ditko, and other observers, such as Brodsky and the assistant editor, Roy Thomas, by issue 25, possibly earlier, the two never spoke or interacted at all. Lee stated the silence was Ditko's choice. Ditko denied this. The reason they didn't speak was because the employer, Stan Lee, decided they wouldn't speak. As an employee, Ditko couldn't choose to not talk to his boss. He didn't have that power. In my opinion, that is the only scenario that makes sense. Anyone who's ever held a job knows if your boss wants to chat, you have no choice but to have a chat. You can't avoid it, or you might be looking for another job. Conversely, if you want to chat and the boss is unavailable, you don't have that chat. It's that simple. So it seems highly unlikely that Ditko put up that wall of silence. That said, once Brodsky started taking his work, it became obvious to Ditko this lack of communication was the new normal. So, while he didn't create that wall of silence, he probably didn't do anything to repair it either. This brings us back to the Green Goblin once again. During Ditko's time, he was a recurring villain that was featured in 5 issues. The Green Goblin was, in essence, a malicious, Joker-like character that always evaded capture and seemed to revel in taunting Spider-Man. Because he always escaped, the Green Goblin's identity was unknown. This created an ongoing mystery that kept the readers guessing. According to legend, Lee and Ditko clashed over the Green Goblin's identity, leading to Ditko quitting. However, at the time Ditko quit, he and Lee hadn't spoken for at least a year. Therefore, Ditko didn't quit because Lee put his foot down and demanded the Goblin be a known character. Furthermore, Lee and Ditko likely never had an argument over the Green Goblin's identity. When the Goblin first appeared, in issue 14, Lee wanted him to be a supernatural being. He was merely a goblin from ancient Egyptian times that had no secret identity. Ditko ignored that origin story, grounded the character as human, and gave him a secret, civilian identity. The Goblin next appeared in issue 17, and it's here where a disagreement could have occurred. With the character returning, Lee and Ditko could have had a discussion concerning his identity and when to reveal it. This is utter speculation on my part, and there's nothing on the record to suggest such a conversation took place. However, this is an attempt to reconcile Lee's memory of an argument within the timeline of events. If it happened at all, and that is highly suspect, it had to have happened at this point. Because, with the first appearance, Lee hadn't even considered a secret identity, so an argument then makes no sense. By the time the Goblin appears again, in issue 23, the two were barely speaking, if at all. So, if an argument actually occurred, it had to have happened in this time period, not more than a year later, as Lee implies. Continuing with this point, the editor, Roy Thomas, provides a plausible explanation for Lee's memory of an argument. In issue 27, which features the Green Goblin, it's revealed the criminal, the crime master, is a complete nobody. Not to mention, he expires just before revealing the Green Goblin's true identity. Thomas suggests that Lee conflates these two plot beats. If an argument did occur, it was over the crime master being no one of consequence. But again, by Ditko's account, by this time the two weren't speaking. So Lee's memory of an argument doesn't fit the series of events, and the justifications for it are pure speculation. Conveniently, the crime master being a nobody undercuts Lee's assertion that Ditko wanted the Goblin to be an unknown character. Once a nobody plot beat was used, it would be highly unlikely Ditko would repeat it. Especially for a high-profile character, such as the Green Goblin. It would be some terrible storytelling. Concerning this subject, Ditko wrote, quote, "I knew from day one, from the first Green Goblin story, who the GG would be. I absolutely knew because I planted him in J. Jonah Jameson's Businessman's Club. It was where JJJ and the GG would be seen together. I planted them together in other stories where the GG would not appear in costume. I wanted JJJ's and the GG's lives to mix for later story drama involving more than just the two characters. I planted the GG's son, same distinctive hairstyle, in the college issues for more dramatic involvement and storyline consequences." Unquote. Regardless of any conclusions one might come to concerning Ditko's memory of events, what he has to say should not be discounted. His version is, at the very least, as valid as Stan Lee's. It may contradict some areas of long-repeated Marvel history, but that's what makes it a worthwhile area of examination, in my opinion. Objectively, it's difficult to accept that Ditko knew who the Green Goblin was right from the first appearance. There's simply no evidence to support that claim. However, there's plenty of circumstantial evidence to suggest he knew the Green Goblin's secret identity long before it was revealed, and he was building towards exposing the villain. The Green Goblin's third appearance, in issue 23, contains a background cameo of Norman Osborn, who was seen at J. Jonah Jameson's club. He is, however, unnamed and has no dialogue. This is his first appearance. Issues 26 and 27 are the Goblin's next appearance. Both issues also contain Norman Osborn cameos. Osborn has a speaking part in both, but at the time, he still has no name. Regardless, it's clear he's a recurring character who Jameson talks with on a regular basis. Harry Osborn is introduced in issue 31. He looks very similar to the unnamed, older character from the club. Harry would be one of the supporting cast, who antagonizes Peter Parker at college. In issue 37, it's revealed that Jameson's friend is Norman Osborn, the father of Harry. It's also pretty clear that Norman is a pretty shady character who doesn't want Spider-Man around. In fact, he knocks Spider-Man out, hoping a wild robot will finish him off. As if to hammer this home, on the final page, Norman holds a rifle, thinking Spider-Man needs to be taken out. The next issue, Norman puts on a disguise and tries to hire someone to get rid of Spider-Man. Notably, Norman wears a lot of green, one of the Goblin's main colors. It's also worth noting, the Green Goblin has not shown up for almost a year, so it's time for the villain to reappear. Unfortunately, this is Ditko's final issue, and this direction remains unfinished. Now, Ditko was known to chart plots and subplots well in advance. This is confirmed by the Charlton editor, Dick Giordano, who visited Ditko's studio in 1965. Quote, "The dispute was, he thought he was writing Spider-Man, but Stan Lee was getting the credit. As proof, he showed me a chart he had up on the wall that said when certain things were going to happen for the next 6 issues. Plots, subplots, and how they were going to interact over that 6-issue span." Unquote. While Norman Osborn's first appearance may have been somewhat random, it seems that Ditko had a specific direction in mind by the time Harry is introduced. Their similar, distinct appearance could not have been coincidental. So Ditko is making subtle connections that won't pay off for a while. After which, Norman takes on a villain role. He's clearly broadcasting that he hates Spider-Man, and it's obvious Ditko is building towards something. All of this supports Ditko's statement that he knew the Green Goblin was Norman Osborn, because Norman was being set up for a major role. To add extra drama, his son, Harry, was involved with Spider-Man's secret identity, Peter Parker. Of course, Norman being the friend of J. Jonah Jameson would also add some dramatic depth. All of this is quite deliberate and planned out in advance. This context and all of this build-up suggests that Ditko was going to reveal that Norman Osborn was the Green Goblin. While not evidence, it's worth noting John Romita's opinion on this subject. Romita took over Spider-Man immediately after Ditko quit, and he did the artwork for the Goblin's identity reveal. Romita said, quote, "I didn't know there was any doubt about Osborn being the Goblin. I didn't know that Ditko had just been setting Osborn up as a straw dog. I just accepted the fact that it was going to be Norman Osborn when we plotted it. I had been following the last couple of issues and didn't think there was really much mystery about it." Unquote. Just to be complete, in a conversation with Bob Sheridan in 1966, Romita allegedly said, "The choice of Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin was Ditko's. Lee was going to have the Green Goblin revealed to be Ned Leeds, but Ditko was too fond of Ned, so he drew the mags so that Osborn had to be the Goblin." However, the passage in question is not a direct quote. That's known as hearsay, Your Honor. I'm only including it here to avoid comments pointing out Romita said Lee wanted the Goblin to be Ned Leeds. It's not Romita's exact words, and the source of Romita's information is unknown, making it double hearsay. As evidence, it is highly suspect. Regardless, Ditko's words on the subject, and the published material that supports it, is strong circumstantial evidence that he knew the Green Goblin was Norman Osborn. So why did Ditko quit? The answer may be rather simple. He quit on principle. Certainly, there were a few more factors, but it boils down to Ditko's principles. I know, in this TikTok influencer world, principles are a foreign concept, so I'll have to elaborate. As is well known, Ditko started to adhere to the philosophy of objectivism, which is different than objectivity. Objectivity is a lack of bias. It's not pushing a narrative in one direction or another. Objectivism is based on Aristotle's law of identity, with a little pro-capitalism sprinkled on top. To paraphrase Ditko, the foundation of objectivism is based on A is A. A thing is what it is. It either is or it isn't that thing. There are no contradictions or gray areas, especially with morality. Something is either good or not good. This is an oversimplification of a philosophical approach that is, in my opinion, an effort in oversimplification itself. How does this apply to Spider-Man? Ditko was doing all the work on Spider-Man, receiving a plotting and artwork credit. Lee was getting credit for the writing. However, in Ditko's view, he was the actual writer. Lee was simply writing dialogue from his notes, so the credits were wrong. Lee was getting recognition for something he didn't do, and Ditko's own role seemed to be greatly diminished. Believe me, in subsequent years, Ditko has written a lot about people assuming unearned credit, so this was clearly a point that bothered him greatly. Now apply Ditko's objectivism principles to this scenario. He had identified that the credits were incorrect, and presumably, he attempted to get them corrected. However, despite his objections, Lee continued to take credit as the writer. Within objectivism, once something immoral, such as unearned credit, has been identified, taking no action and allowing it to continue is just as immoral as doing the act itself. So if Ditko allowed this inaccurate credit to continue while creating Spider-Man comics, he would be endorsing Lee's immoral act. And in turn, that would make him as bad as Lee. On principle, Ditko couldn't allow that. As some have pointed out, Ditko and Jack Kirby had been promised profit sharing from the publisher Martin Goodman, specifically for merchandise related to the characters they created. Naturally, Goodman was under no legal obligation to share profits, so he didn't. But allegedly, he dangled the possibility to give both Kirby and Ditko incentive to remain at Marvel. While Ditko wasn't completely motivated by money, after all, he walked away from a good paycheck from Marvel, this can't be discounted outright. It somewhat ties into his principles of getting paid for the work he was producing. In comparison, Ditko was also doing work for Charlton, having revived Blue Beetle and Captain Atom. It was there he got proper credit. Furthermore, it wasn't a hostile work environment. One can't overlook the fact that Ditko was a human being, and it could not have been pleasant to, air quotes, collaborate with Lee, who avoided his presence. Not to mention, Lee was waiting for sales to slip on Spider-Man so he could justify taking control of the title and fire Ditko. So that negative undercurrent probably had an effect on Ditko. That said, this is mainly speculative. In fact, Ditko's actual reason for leaving Marvel is nothing but speculation. On the topic, Ditko merely stated, quote, "There have been many claim knowers of why I quit Spider-Man and Marvel. Stan and I were arguing over, disputing who is, or should be, the Green Goblin, over not getting promised royalties and other known, floating, arbitrary truths, the real stories, reasons, fantasies, by comic book fans and fan publications, historians. All such claimers lack first-hand knowledge. All are guessing, creating their own reasons, fictions, and fantasies. The only person who had the right to know why I was quitting refused to come out of his office or to call me in." Unquote. Ditko spitefully acknowledges and implies all the theories are incorrect, but he doesn't say that outright, leaving the topic open for interpretation. So the actual reason remains unknown. Which is an unsatisfying way to end this very long essay. Unfortunately, facts in the public record don't care about our feelings. They are what they are, and unless something turns up in Ditko's unpublished writing, if any such work exists, then it will never be known exactly why he quit Marvel. Be seeing you. AI my ass. Thank you for watching. Thanks to all my fine supporters on Patreon and YouTube. Your ongoing support makes it possible for this channel to continue. I appreciate every single one of you. Please subscribe if you've not already. Leave a comment and a like. I try to keep ads and self-promotional bits like this to a minimum, so if you can, consider directly supporting this channel on Patreon. Extra special thanks to Eidolon, Constant Disappointment Records, Jeff Nicholson, Sickin, Francis De La Cruz, Russell Bull, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Dennis, Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrew, Corey Drew, L.S. Gregor, Brian Deaton, Tom Granis, John Gaunt, James Graham, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient. Until next time.